Hi guys, Rachana here and I welcome you all to the hashtag Ask Rachana show. Like we have done in the last week, I'm going to give answers to a few more questions which have been asked on my community tab by many of my viewers. I'll try to answer majority of the questions, but I don't guarantee as usual that I'll answer all the questions. So the first one coming up for you is from John Latina, and he has asked that how can I believe any company's profit and loss account, balance sheet and cash flow statement, as we know a lot of frauds are coming out. So how can we identify truth and how to analyze a small business because their all data is not available on the internet? Okay, so he has asked essentially two questions. One is about large companies, whether their P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, how can we find out whether there are frauds in these balance sheets or not? What I would like to do is I actually went through a lot of comments and there is one more comment which is a very similar one that has been asked by Mr. Ravi Natarajan. Okay, he has first told me congratulations for the program, everything. Thanks, Ravi. And he says, my question is that, like, why Satyam like frauds are still continuing? Why watchdogs like ICAI, rating agencies and SEBI still continue to adopt a soft approach to such frauds? And who will compensate for the investors' loss in respect of their holdings in Yes Bank, ILFS, Cox & Kings, DHFL, etc.? And how to identify such frauds well in advance? Please report. He's from Chennai. I'd like to tell you that detecting all these frauds is really a big task. Ideally, it is not even the responsibility of the auditor to detect the frauds as a primary responsibility. Please understand this. Many people these days are saying anything and everything auditor is involved. See, it's not because I am a CA, I'm trying to defend the auditors, not at all. But you need to understand what is the basic concept of auditing. See, if there are crores of transactions in an organization, it's impossible for a human being to check all the crore transactions which take place in an organization. What auditor does is that he selects few samples out of the entire transactions and then he checks them, and based on these samples, he gives his opinion on the financial statements. So it's not possible for any damn auditor to actually understand whether frauds are taking place in an organization or not. Basically, he can't give an absolute assurance. He can't guarantee about it. So what he can say is, to my knowledge, to my understanding, frauds are not existing in the organization. And the only reason for that is he has to follow an approach of sampling, right? Then the question comes up is, are these rating agencies keeping a very soft approach to such frauds? I believe so, yes. There are very soft approaches for such frauds. There should be a lot of penalties for such frauds. I personally believe that. Let me just update you on this. One of the big fours is the auditor of ILFS. I'm sure you might have heard about big fours. Ernst & Young, Deloitte, KPMG and PwC. These are the top 4 auditing firms all across the world. And right now, one of these big fours is being trialed in the case of ILFS, and there is a proposed ban of 5 years in the field of auditing for this big four. Again, you may definitely argue on this that 5 years is nothing, they should be banned permanently and all that. But yes, definitely the penalties have increased for sure. If you ask me whether these are enough, I have my different thoughts on this. Penalty jitni zyada hoti hai na, to mere hisab se the chances of reoccurrence is definitely less. So yes, I feel that the penalties for such frauds should be much higher. Who would compensate for that? Unfortunately, no one would compensate for your loss. Whenever you are entering into markets, you take that much risk and then only you enter into the shares or debentures for that matter of all these companies. Let me just throw light on one of the types of audits, which is known as a forensic audit. If you have heard about this, I can very proudly say that I am one of the faculty members of a forensic audit of our CA Institute, and on an average, every month I travel at least one city and I give a session on forensic audit. Basically, this is one of the types of audits wherein the basic focus is to try to find out frauds. Okay, so yahan pe whenever a forensic auditor does any audit, his approach to the entire audit is that daya kuch to gadbad hai. Okay, so that is the main start point of the auditor. If I'm talking about a normal auditor, he does not start with this basic assumption. That's the difference between a normal audit versus a forensic audit. Again, just for your update, these days RBI, SEBI, they are very frequently calling for forensic audits. So I personally believe that it's better late than never. At least these organizations have now woken up, and they are at least trying to do a lot of even proactive forensic audits rather than reactive forensic audits. So it's a very interesting and upcoming area. You can search about that. If time permits, I'll definitely make a video on forensic audit also. If you want me to make a video on that, just let me know in the comment section. I'll definitely think on that, right? So moving on to the next question, Yash Channa, he says that, ma'am, can you suggest us some books on stock market for beginners? There are many books. One of the book is Intelligent Investor, but I personally feel that it's a little bit tricky. I mean, it has got some technical words. To understand this book, you need a basic understanding of the stock market. That's by Mr. Benjamin Graham. And there's one more by Mr. Peter Lynch. I guess the name of that book is One Up on the Wall Street. That's also a very good book. You can have a look at that. I'll also try to make again one more video on some basic books, or maybe one or two book summaries on good books on stock market, right? Pankaj Pathak asks, congratulations, thank you. And technical analysis or fundamental analysis, which one would be better? Both are good. I personally feel to understand fundamental analysis, you need to have some background of finance, or if you don't have a background of finance, you should have the lectures by Rachana Ranade. Okay, I have recorded the entire lecture series on fundamental analysis, in which I have discussed a lot about what is a balance sheet, what is P&L. I've also put up 2 lectures on YouTube as well. In that I've taught from scratch as to what is fundamental analysis. See, the basic concept is that you need to understand the balance sheet, P&L, cash flows. You need to understand the ratios. You need to understand the shareholding pattern. You need to understand a lot of things. I just can't go on and on. It's a big analysis for fundamental analysis. Vis-a-vis, if I talk about technical analysis, I know few technical analysts, few of them are students of mine, who say that, madam, we don't even know what the company does. We don't know what is the product of the company. We don't know who is their management, but we know what are charts. We know how the chart patterns speak up. So they say that even if I don't know anything about the company, I still can fairly analyze that whether the company stock would move in the upward direction or in the downward direction. So these are 2 different studies. I don't say A is better than B. I personally would go one step ahead and say that if you know both, the chances or the probability of you making losses in stock market will be terribly reduced down. Okay, so what I do personally, I'll tell you, I first do a fundamental analysis and then I back it up with technical analysis. With both analysis on the cards, my losses probability definitely is reduced. Don't ask me how much I've done till date, but it's less than others, I can guarantee that. Yes, so let's move on. The next question has been asked by Sandeep Bonthala, and he says, intraday trading will really work out or not? Ma'am, please suggest. Sandeep, frankly speaking, I never do a lot of intraday trading. I personally believe that you should have time from 9:15 to 3:30 to dedicatedly sit on the portal, and then only you can read through smaller candlesticks. Like it could be as low as a 1-minute candlestick or a 15-minute candlestick, and then maybe you can work out certain strategies on intraday. What I have seen with many of my friends who do a lot of intraday trading is that they would go in a correct direction for, let us say, 4 strategies back to back. Then they develop a lot of confidence. Maybe then it turns into overconfidence. And then they would go ahead with the 5th strategy with full-fledged confidence. And you never know about the markets. They can also surprise you in a negative way. If that happens, then whatever you have earned in the first 4 trades, you can lose out in the 5th trade. And so I personally feel that intraday trading could work out only if you have a good discipline of a strict stop loss. So don't be under the impression that I know anything and everything about the stock market, and just because my first 4 strategies worked out, the 5th strategy has to work out. It will never happen back to back. So just in case if you're losing out on a specific trade, you have to understand and just cut out that position and maintain that stop loss, right? The next question is asked by Ravindra Patil, and he says that what is the best study to predict market direction both in short term and in long term? As I mentioned that one of the ways to predict the market direction could be technical analysis, and even in fundamental analysis we do talk about economy analysis as a very big element of fundamental analysis. That could also be one of the ways to predict the direction of market. Recently you might have, if you are a well-read person, then you might have read about recession worries coming around the cards. So there is a great possibility that recession could be around the corner. Just try to search it out on the net. If time permits, I'll also make a separate video on that. I've read a lot about this specific topic. There are many economists who believe that US might go into a recession in the coming 1 or 2 years, and always remember, a big economy collapses, all the small economies around it would also be hit in a negative way. So I feel in the short term, long term, to predict the market direction, two things: technical analysis as well as economy analysis as a whole. Okay, so the next question is by Ram Kumar R. He says that, first of all, great job done by teaching basic and fundamental analysis for stock market. I'm glad you have watched both my lecture series. But my question is, do you think that only by having clarity and basics and fundamental analysis is good enough to play on stock markets, especially without knowing about technical? Oh my God, so many people are asking about technical analysis today. Or if you're planning to do that in the future, please let us know. Okay. So the question basically is again about the same thing: is only fundamental analysis enough, or we need to have a technical analysis? As I mentioned just in the previous comment, that having both knowledge is definitely good. That's what I do generally. And yes, I'm planning to take out a separate series on technical analysis as well. My target is to release this separate entire series on technical analysis before November 2019. So maybe 2 or 3 more months of your wait, and I'll be up with my next series on technical analysis, right? The next question which has been asked is
a few moments later.
Parag Sethi, and he says that please suggest how to wait and keep patient in trade when trend is 100% correct, but it ends with small profit or loss due to price fluctuations before the final trend. Frankly speaking, I exactly know, wow, in capital, I exactly know where the stock price will move at the end, but still not able to make money out of it. Paras sir, please let me know where do you take classes. I would like to join your class, sir, because even I don't know exactly where the stock price moves. So sir, please give me your number. I'll contact you for sure, right? My next question is, and the last question, I guess I've overboarded my time as of now, but the last question which I'm taking up for the day is Sai Upalapati, and he says that is non-taxable amount is annual income 2,50,000 or 5 lakh. Oh, so he's asking about the basic exemption limit, whether it's 2,50,000 or whether it's 5 lakh. There would be a big confusion if I talk about this in a very short time duration. But just understand this, that if your income is within 5 lakh, if your total income is within 5 lakh, then you are not taxed. Okay, so let's say your total net taxable income is 4,50,000. You don't have to pay even 1 rupee of tax. Okay, but if your tax is 6 lakhs rupees, right, then you have crossed that threshold of 5 lakh, then for you 5 lakh is not the basic exemption limit. Your basic exemption limit will be 2,50,000. There is a concept of rebate which comes into picture, which I'm not discussing in this short video right now. So I have given an example for this. I'll just quickly repeat it. If your income is within 5 lakhs, you are not taxed. But the moment you go beyond 5 lakhs, then your basic exemption limit goes back to 2,50,000. Okay. And one more question he has asked is, if someone is earning 30 lakhs per annum, how much he should pay tax? Ooh, you're asking me for a tax calculation. How much he should save by showing house loan or car loan or children education? Ooh, can you give me an example? And thanks, madam, for sharing. Okay. Yes, actually, there are many people who have asked even questions on income tax. Me being a chartered accountant, I definitely feel that I can give some inputs on how to save your taxes legally. Very important, right? So again, I am planning to have a separate series on saving taxes in a very, very legal manner. But just to give you an example how you can save tax by if you have a housing loan, there are 2 different sections of Income Tax Act. One is section 24B and one is section 80C. Okay. Understand, whenever you take a housing loan, you repay the housing loan and you have to repay something known as EMIs. Okay, EMI is an equated monthly installment. So let's say, just an example, if your EMI amount is 1 lakh rupees, this is just a blank example. 1 lakh rupees assume gets divided as 80,000 is your interest payment and 20,000 is your principal payment, right? This 80,000 rupees as your interest payment, you will get as a deduction from section 24B. Okay, so this is your deduction from income from house property. So 80,000 will be reduced from your income level, right? And this 20,000, which is your principal amount repayment, this is also available as a deduction, but that deduction is available under section 80C. These are 2 different sections. Now you might say that why these 2 different sections exist? Is there any threshold for that? So yes, there is a threshold. The ATC threshold is 1,50,000 rupees. Okay, so just as an example, if your total EMI for entire year, the principal amount is principal repayment is 2 lakhs, then you will get a deduction of maximum 1,50,000 only. Okay, so there are certain limits which are set up under various sections. You need to know about that. It can't be discussed in a very short video, but I hope you got this very clearly, how you can use your housing loan to reduce your tax. So I guess this is about my Ask Rachana show for today. I've answered again more than 8-9 for sure, maybe 10 questions at least in today's session, and I hope you have enjoyed this. Keep asking me more and more questions. I would be happy to help, and keep posting in the community tab. I've also given the description below. You can click on that. That will take you to the community tab, and I'll be happy to answer maximum questions. I'll be keeping this show on an ongoing basis. I'm planning to post this at least once a week. Okay, so that maximum questions can be answered by me at one possible lot. Okay, so that's it from my side. Jai Hind. Bye bye.